You were explaining to me that you think that there was a relationship between the legislation that was known as Bill C-50, which is the changes that were made to immigration in the budget last year, I believe, and the later changes that were made around immigration. Can you explain that, please?
Okay, so we had something called Bill C-50 come up last March. That was called the Budget Implementation Bill. So it was to implement the budget as a whole. But within that budget, we had we had a change to the Immigration Act that was slipped in by the Conservatives. Most Canadians were not even aware of it. There was some resistance to that change, but very little. The New Democratic Party and some people's groups resisted. In the end, that bill was passed. So it meant that the Immigration Act now allowed for the minister to choose which people would have priority as permanent residents in Canada. We know that for the past 10-15 years at least, under the Liberal government, as well as the Conservatives, we have not had enough workers at Citizenship and Immigration Canada to process the applications for permanent residency. So we have about 900,000 in a waiting list outside of the country wanting to come in as permanent residents. With the change to the Immigration Act, that 900,000 and the first come, first served system has been eliminated, and the Minister of Immigration now determines how we choose among the applications. Combining that with the change of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, where we bring in more temporary migrant workers, you can see that the workers or the people that will be prioritized are the temporary migrants and those that have finished their 2 years and are accepted in first by their employers.
So, for many immigrants, it will be a state of perpetual permanent impermanence, right?
This is likely the case if what has happened in the live-in caregiver program happens elsewhere. Given that our labor legislation has been weakened in most provinces of Canada, and given that the federal government does not intervene in provincial affairs and also refuses to take responsibility for the migrants coming in through the federal system, it is likely that employers in many sectors will be able to behave like live-in caregiver employers have been behaving, which is do what you want with your workers. You know they need the job. You know that their legal status in Canada is attached to you as an employer through the work permit, so you do what you want with those workers.
How does that affect other Canadian workers?
For Canadian workers as a whole, things are not looking good. As we know, with weaker labor legislation throughout the provinces, things have been harder for unions, for collective bargaining, and for non-unionized workers. This adds to the problem because we are further bringing down the standards by which we measure employers in this country.
As you go forward with your research, what will you be looking at next, and what in particular are you going to be concerned with? What are the warning signs, the trouble, the things that you think are going to be troublesome in the future?
If we look at the occupations where we are preferring to keep some temporary migrants on a permanent basis, we see the health sector come up in many ways, in many occupations. So that is a big area of concern. Also, in the past year, we've seen 4 provinces in Canada sign bilateral agreements with the government of the Philippines to bring in temporary migrant nurses. So this is an area where unions and other activists need to be very vigilant and be sure that the temporary migrant nurses coming in are coming in with full rights and full protections, and that they are part of unions, because most of our healthcare workplaces are unionized. So that's a big area to look out for, and I will be doing my share of that. But also, I would say, given the economic recession that will only get worse for a certain time, we need to look at how employers will use temporary migrants to further cut their own costs. That could mean more exploitation of migrant workers. On the other hand, it could mean deporting them with little explanation, because as we know, this is a very so-called flexible workforce, and employers can therefore do what they want to a much larger extent.
Thank you very much, Salimah Valiani.